Would you like to know the future? Would you like to know how the world ends? To know these things, you must know the book of Revelation. So today we're discussing three things. What is Revelation about? What are the main parts of Revelation? And what are the main takeaways from the book of Revelation? So, what is the book of Revelation about? Well, the book of Revelation is about God's judgment. It's how God ends this sinful world and begins a new sin-free world. What are the main parts of the book of Revelation? Well, we're talking about judgment here. So first, Jesus is going to judge the seven churches. And then we deal with the early tribulation judgment. There is a middle tribulation interlude, a late tribulation judgment, and then we deal with the end of the world. The first church that Jesus deals with is Ephesus. And Ephesus is a church that used to be on fire for God. They were growing in the faith, getting stronger and stronger, loving the Lord with all their hearts. But up somewhere along the lines, they slowed down. They're pursuing Jesus, but not nearly as fast as they used to. And so they become stagnated. They have stagnated love or a loss of zeal. You can find out more about the Ephesians through the New Testament letters. The second church is the Church of Smyrna, and this is the crushed church. This church is in a city where there is heavy, heavy emperor worship. The people at that time, to keep the Roman Empire united, would actually bow down and worship Caesar as if he were a deity or a god. And because of this heavy emperor worship, the people in Smyrna were crushing the Christian church. They were pulverizing it with their persecution. And Jesus is telling them that it's important to wait, be steadfast. The next church is the Church of Pergamum. In order to fit in with the city of Pergamum, the Christians there were making compromises. They wouldn't necessarily worship the deities, but they would engage in some of their revelry. And then there's the Church of Thyatira. And in this church, they were tolerating a lot of false prophets and a lot of false leaders in the Christian faith. And those leaders were leading the Christians astray. The next church is the Church of Sardis. And although Jesus doesn't mention any specific sins with this church like he does with some of the others, this is called the dead church. This is a church where people are doing really nothing more than congregating. It's kind of like the way some Christians are when they just show up on Sunday, they don't show up any other time, and they don't even act like a Christian throughout the week. Then there's the Church of Philadelphia. This is the church of the open door. And the open door that Jesus promises them is probably not so much about health and wealth as it is about preaching the good news. And then the last of these seven churches is the Laodicean churches. And this is often called the lukewarm church. And it's called it that way because it's very complacent. They're not really on fire for God. They're not even a cold church like the Church of Sardis. They're sort of blah, 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 all is well. As long as me and my family are doing well, we don't care about anybody else. That was the type of attitude that the Laodiceans had. So, Revelation chapters 4 through 11 deal with the early tribulation. And here, John is invited to go up into heaven. There is a scroll that needs to be read, and nobody is found worthy to open the scroll, except for one, and that is Jesus. So Jesus takes the scroll, and he opens up the first seal, and that first seal happens to reveal a white horse. Now, that white horse represents a false Messiah, or an Antichrist deception. This white horse rider brings war to the world. And we actually see that in the second seal that Jesus reveals, which is a red horse. And that red horse represents war. And after that seal is opened up, Jesus opens up another seal on the scroll, which is a black horse. And that black horse represents famine. And then the next seal, the fourth seal, Jesus opens up and reveals a pale horse, which represents death. These are known as the four horsemen of the apocalypse. These are special judgments out of the first seven, the seven seals. There is another set of special judgments called the three woes, which I'll discuss later on. Jesus opens up a fifth seal, and here we see all of the murdered saints that were underneath God's altar. And they're crying out to God and asking God to avenge them, to give them justice. And each of these murdered saints is actually rewarded. In the sixth seal, there is a great earthquake and some other natural disasters. And then in the seventh seal that Jesus opens up, we see that the seventh seal opens up and reveals 7 trumpets, which is a new set of judgments. Now, the mark of the believer is actually different from the mark of the beast, which we'll be discussing later on. So now we are moving into the 7 trumpet judgments. This is in Revelation chapters 9 through 11. The first trumpet sounds, and 1/3 of all the plant life is burnt up. And the second trumpet sounds, and 1/3 of the sea is turned to blood. By sea, we're probably meaning the Mediterranean Sea, because that was the sea that John was exiled to when he was exiled to the island of Patmos. The third trumpet sounds, and 1/3 of the drinking water is poisoned. And then the fourth trumpet sounds, and 1/3 of the sun, moon, and stars are dim. They become darkened. Now we start moving into the 3 woes that I talked about earlier. The first woe is the 5th trumpet, and that has a whole mess of tormenting locusts that are attacking people who are not God's people. And this is where we start seeing a distinction between the later plagues and the earlier plagues. The earlier plagues affected everybody, but these later plagues are affecting only people who are not devoted to God. The second woe, which is the 6th trumpet, causes an army of 200 million to go around and destroy 1/3 of the world. And then the 7th trumpet, or the third woe, produces a lot of natural disasters, including a very severe hailstorm. Revelation chapters 12 through 14 describe for us what the middle of the tribulation is like. And the first story that they give describes a story about the woman and the dragon. Basically, the woman represents God's people, the dragon represents Satan. And so Satan is actually kicked out of heaven, and he can no longer accuse God's people, but he comes down to earth where the woman is, and he is persecuting the woman. When the woman is able to escape from him, he develops what is known as the Satanic Trinity. This is in Revelation chapter 13. Basically, what he does is the dragon represents Satan. He comes from the sky, and then he raises up the beast, which is the Antichrist. And the beast comes out of the sea. And then on top of that, they raise up the false prophet, which the false prophet is a third beast which comes out of the earth. And the false prophet requires everybody in the world to bow down and to worship the beast, the Antichrist. And as a way of showing loyalty to the Antichrist, the false prophet requires everybody to get a mark in their forehead or the right hand. So now we are recognizing that we are dealing with a physical mark. This is not a mark on the heart like the mark of the believer. This is an actual physical mark to say this person belongs to Satan. Now, on top of this, there are 3 angels that give some proclamations. There's good news that is being spread to people so that people don't fall into this trap without being given some warning. And the first one is to fear God. And then the second one says Babylon is fallen. Now, what is Babylon? Well, we'll discuss Babylon in just a moment too. And then the third announcement is that those people who rebel against God and take that mark of the beast, those people will face eternal condemnation. These are the 7 bowls or 7 vials discussed in Revelations chapter 15 through 16. The first vial is released and sores break out on everybody who has the mark of the beast. The second bowl is released and all the sea turns to blood. The third bowl is released and the rivers and the springs become blood. The fourth bowl is released and the sun scorches the people. The fifth bowl is released and the Antichrist kingdom plunges into darkness. The sixth bowl is released, and by now we're getting towards the end of the Great Tribulation, and the Euphrates River dries up. And this creates a way for a massive army of kings of the east to come towards the Antichrist. And then the seventh bowl is released, and there is a massive earthquake. In Revelation chapters 17 through 18, we read about the judgment of Babylon. What is Babylon, you might be asking? Well, Babylon is just another word for Antichrist's kingdom. That's all it really is. Revelation 19 tells us Jesus returns. Yeah! He comes in on a white horse. He takes the Antichrist and false prophet, throws them into the lake of fire, and then he takes Satan himself and puts him into the abyss. So now we have entered the final part of the book of Revelation, which is the end of the world. This takes place in Revelation chapters 20 through 22. Jesus, after he gets rid of all of his foes, he rules for 1,000 years. During this time, Satan remains in the abyss for 1,000 years. It's like a prison. After the 1,000 years are up, Satan is released, and then he creates this massive army to attack God's people. Well, that attack ends in failure, and then Satan is finally destroyed, put into the lake of fire once and for all. And now we have entered the final great white throne judgment, where Jesus is going to judge all of his enemies. At this point, and then the Bible tells us that anyone who's not found in the book of life will be put into the lake of fire. And after he has finally made these judgments, he creates this new heaven and new earth, and all of these former sorrows are no longer to be remembered. So, where am I going to with all this? Hey, if you haven't made Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior, you need to do it today. Make him the Lord of your life. You're never going to regret it. And in addition to that, read your Bible each day. Get to know God a little bit more each day. And I'd like it if you would like, comment, or subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. I forgot my line. Hey, if you like this video, I've got a couple more that I think you might like. The first one is Where is the Messiah, which talks about how God prepares Israel for the coming of the Messiah. And then the second one is Jesus Christ, Four Views, which discuss 4 different perspectives of who Jesus Christ is.